Welcome to the Women at the Top podcast interview series. My name is Regina Barr, and I'm the founder of the Women at the Top Network, and I will be your host today. Women at the Top is a community of like-minded women who share the Watt vision and mission. And simply put, our goal is to empower aspiring women to lead. And we do this in a couple of ways, by providing training, information, and connections. And just because we're women at the top does not mean we discriminate against men. And it is my pleasure to tell you that joining me today is Patrick McGowan, owner of Punchin. Before we get started, I do want to tell you just a little bit about Patrick. Patrick has said, I was tired of looking like a potato on video. And I think many of us can relate to that. So he founded Punchin in 2020 to solve the mystery behind what it means for business professionals to show up on camera with credibility and presence. He's also a speaker, author, and entrepreneur, advising executives and consultants on how to use filmmaking, innovation, and change leadership to address complex business challenges. He currently lives in South Dakota with his wife, Bobby, and their mutt, Jet. So on that note, welcome to our program today, Patrick.
It's great to be here.
Excited. I know you and I met last year at a conference, and I'm going to jump right in and get us started because I enjoyed my time spent with you, and I really want to share some of your knowledge with our audience today. So let's get started with your backstory. I love to hear the
Yes.
backstory on our guests. So tell us, what is Punchin, and more, how'd you come?
Oh, that's a great question. So Punchin is we are a creative consultancy working with individuals who really want to come alive on Zoom and other video. Video today, we were all thrown into it in 2020, but in 2020, we set up at the kitchen table or a closet. Regardless of where we set up, 2020 was sort of the free pass year. We all got, the get out of free jail card. And then in 2021, we resisted the idea of needing to actually show up as our best self on video. And over the last 2 years, now going into 2022, actually 22, the reality is video is here to stay. It's not, that's one way to say it. The other way of saying it is video is how we do business now. And so Punchin is helping professionals like ourselves show up on video with presence and credibility, because those are the two drivers that help us create the connection, the engagement, and have the influence and impact that we want to have. So I started Punchin actually thinking of what I really was looking for was somebody who had the solution of what equipment I wanted to buy. So what webcam did I need, and who had it all bundled in a nice little box like Fix, right? So I hate it when I joke about this, but Stitch Fix is sort of Granimals for adults. And I was thinking,
Agree.
they just don't have the
Agree.
snaps anymore, right?
Yeah.
So who was the Stitch Fix for video conference equipment for folks like us working from home? And that's what I was looking for, and nobody was. So I had to do the research. And like my bio says, I was tired of looking like a potato on camera. But more importantly, I really felt the and the discomfort of being on camera and not showing up in the way that I imagined I should. So I
Yeah.
had to solve the problem for myself, and it's out of that Punchin was. I got away from the idea that I was the video conference equipment that people could just buy, because who wants to deal with inventory?
Right.
Um, that
If
took
you could
all of
even
the
get
20.
inventory back in 2020.
That was exactly that was the other piece of it, and it was just like, oh, gamble. But who wants to deal with inventory? But the bigger challenge and the bigger opportunity I've learned is this idea of showing up in a way that we are credible, and also we know we have self credibility. We're very confident in who we are and what we bring, and that confidence now translates across the lens. And so that's where Punchin was born. It actually started off as Punchin Present
Okay.
name of the company, which has kind of come full
Yeah.
circle with this idea of presence. Had that at the very beginning. I like the ring of it, punch and presence. And then I realized, like any good marketer, people are going to
Sure.
shorten that name automatically. So within about 30 days, I shortened it to punch in and said, this is
Yeah,
it.
that's great. Love hearing that backstory. And as you said, um, video is here to stay, or video is how we're going to be doing business. So I
Yeah.
think most of us have gotten on the bandwagon and are really trying to up level our presence, if you will. So share with us, if you would, some of your observation when it comes to video and media in general.
Yeah. So here's a video we have to remember is a storytelling medium. And I think the one thing I would love for your listeners to take away with is a simple question, and that is, what are you trying to say before you say a word? Because when and how you show up on video speaks volumes. And what the research actually shows us is that we are, even on video, people are still making snap judgments. And those snap judgments tend to be residual. They are lasting, and they tend to affect the long-term impressions that we're able to make. And so when we recognize that we bring a story to how we show up on video, that's the backstory. It's not something that we're verbalizing, but it is something that we're carrying, that we showcase every time the camera turns on. We believe in that, recognize and our value in that story, that translates across the lens.
I'm chuckling as you say this because I told you I had somebody in their bedroom with the bed hair thinking about what you're saying about story. And I'm like, wow, what story were they telling or what were they trying to convey? And I'll also add, I did have someone also show up in what looked like a bathing suit top. And I'm trying not to be judgmental.
Oh,
And I'm a coach at heart. So I wanted to take her aside because I thought, OMG, I knew who the audience was because I was an audience member for that. So, and you're talking about that to think about what do you want to say before you even say it and what's your story?
yeah. And that's actually a definition of presence. I've learned is that's a definition of presence. So whether we're on camera or in person, the question is, what is the story I'm trying to tell? And what is my motivation in this space?
Hmm.
And those two things, because in particularly in general, creatures. I mean, I think our mutual friend Henry may have actually said this. I'm going to give him credit, but, we call Hollywood the motion picture capital of the world. But when you really look at it, it's
Hmm.
picture capital of the world
Yes.
because video is an emotional medium. And what we've all come to realize is the camera doesn't lie. We realize that we may not have been able to articulate it, but it is a reality that what we bring into the space gets communicated across the lens even before we say anything out loud.
Well, I think that's great. The camera doesn't lie. And I think that kind of leads into my next question, which is interesting because there's a saying, you never get a second chance to make a great first impression. And so here I'm asking you that question. And literally, I had my questions together several weeks ago, and I got from a friend who has a digital marketing agency, and that was so I just thought that was fascinating given our conversation today. So fact that you don't get a second chance
Mm-hmm.
to make that great first impression, and with that personal presence being such a big part of it, why do you think presence is so important? And um, about that first impression, how has video changed that? Like, what have you seen that people like maybe some faux pas around what people have
Oh,
done?
oh yeah, that's a good one. Um, one of those is when somebody uses, well, a faux pas, or what I refer to as sort of beginner mistakes, is there are situations where they send, and there are the situations when a virtual background is just a cover up. And I think that people, do you recommend virtual backgrounds? And I say no, having a real background is going to be better for a lot of reasons. One, it can help tell your story. The reason you have a virtual background, it has to support your story, it has to support your brand. That doesn't mean we brand it. I mean, I was on a conference call where a guy had an background and it was the most distracting thing. And it was just the same animation on a loop. And it was incredibly distracting and actually took away from not only his presence, but it took away from his power, it took away from his credibility in the process. And so I think that in today's day and age, particularly with the amount of noise, how can you create a signal that people want to pay attention to? So, you get this email from a marketing agency, people's attention. It's about to who you are and what you have to. You have to be able to get there. You have to be able to attract them to your message. And this goes on both internal organizations as well as external. So the marketing, we're always selling ideas. We're always in those are internally. How do we get somebody's attention in a way and frame tune in a way we can maximize our influence? Ways that we do that is through having more presence. And there was actually a study done, and Amy Cuddy actually references this in her book, Presence, Dr. Amy Cuddy out of Harvard. And the study that she references were on pitching to investors. And what they found out was what they determined was that those with more presence and more credibility actually were more likely to get investor funding. It wasn't the presentation and it wasn't the individual. It was literally their presence, their confidence, and their credibility. And so when we look at that in terms of today's day and age, the difference is we're just on camera. And so it comes down to little things like gestures, facial expressions, and being able to communicate that I believe in what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I believe in what I'm pitching. Mm-hmm. And I believe that it's going to be something good for you.
So that conversation around presence and credibility leads me to my next question, because you're on the credibility is more important than authenticity. And yes. I would tell you, I think that probably would come as a surprise to most people. So tell us a little bit more about that. Why do you think credibility is more important than authenticity?
Yeah, credibility is more important than authenticity. Let me frame this in another. Let me reframe this just a little differently. Okay. And let me just put a quick caveat as I organize my thoughts. Number one, it's not that credibility replaces authenticity. Credibility is more important than authenticity. What we see online and in social media today are people saying, "This is who I am, just accept me." I had this conversation actually with my 20-year-old daughter recently because the barista at Starbucks was having a bad day. And she was saying, well, everybody gets to have a bad day. And I said, I completely agree. Everybody gets to have a bad day, but that doesn't mean that they of treating other people badly or not doing their job to the level of expectation. And she thought about it for a little bit. And I said, what would you say if this were an actor in Hamilton? They're having a bad day. You just paid, what's the difference between a $4 cup of coffee and tea? We do expect that actor on Broadway, regardless of what kind of day they had, if they're showing up to work, they're going to perform at the location or that's the credibility factor. How I feel, who I am, helps to is ability, So what the research is showing in this span is that with credibility and let's also say competence, we want to lead with credibility and competence. We also want to follow up with warmth. It's actually on, if you want to do an XY graph, the upper row, high warmth, high competency, but you want to lead with competency and credibility.
Well, I'm glad you said that and that you brought in some of the confidence too, because my experience with most women is that they are incredibly competent, but they're not always confident. And I
Yep.
think that from an emotional standpoint, you mentioned like it's not, you know, part of your credibility and your competency is that you get to have a, you're not even out there. Um, I think most women can do that very effectively. They can be competent, credible, and warm. So I think that that's the beauty that women, and I'm generalizing. There's lots of men, or some, but in general, I think that's a gift that
Mm-hmm.
most women table. And when you were at professionalism, that conversation with your daughter, which I love, I wish you recorded that and it would go viral or something. Um, what jumped into my head because you made the correlation to Hamilton is the show must go on, right?
Yeah.
You have a bad day, and obviously if you're in Hamilton, you don't get to say that. But last week I had a very sick dog. I was up literally sleeping. I haven't done a 24-hour day like that in a long time, but I still did my meetings and I got on and people are like, oh, how are you? I said, I have a sick dog, but I am so excited to be meeting with you. And I'm so happy to be sitting down and doing something normal other than running after my dog all day. And so then they know I'm human, but
Yep.
you know what? Business right now. So I have something going on, but that's not going to take away from the time that, so I do love that. So I want to build more on this credibility, it being an essential component, and especially since you've called that out, not necessarily eliminating the authenticity, but kind of elevating it up a little bit more than that authenticity. And we're really talking about having trust and having great relationships and how to do
Mm-hmm.
that now in a visual medium on video. So what are some things that our audience could do to get more of that credibility on camera?
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll do technical level, but readjust your camera. So, Regina, if we wanted to look at you as just a quick example, is this okay?
Yes, go right
And
ahead.
okay, if I wanted to give you a little bit more power and a little bit more command of the screen, I would eliminate the negative space above your head.
Mm,
Well, most of us are familiar with the in-person type of events. So if we're facilitating a meeting, it's you have to command the room, right?
mhm.
And if we're giving a presentation from stage, we want to command the stage. Today, we have to command the screen. And one way we will do that is by framing us in that space so that we're not on the bottom portion.
Okay.
And this is particularly important for women because it is a power position that if you are down here, look how big my compared to me
Yeah, that looks terrible.
versus right. Well, this
Yeah.
is borderline Wilson as well, right? So that's another beginner or rookie mistake is you see people showing up like Wilson from Home
Yes.
Improvement, the
Hmm.
'90s sitcom Home Improvement, right? It still happens, which I find hilarious. But you want to give yourself posture and stature, and it's actually one of those. Video is kind of an equalizer that way when you know how to set up your equipment, and the equipment is there to amplify who you bring. So when we talk about credibility, one of the things that I work with my clients these days is on their story. Because one of the things we have to spend a little bit of time on our story, and this is actually what actors do before they get in front of a camera. So Philip Seymour Hoffman, one of the best actors of our day and age, he didn't matter how big the role was. It could have been 10 lines. And he's investigating who this character. The script doesn't tell you everything. The script gives you lines, it gives you this moment in time history of this individual. And so there's one guy who calls it the bones. You really want to develop who this character is and understand their story, because now you understand their motivations. Now you understand how to bring this two-dimensional character from a script into a three-dimensional world and make them a three-dimensional person with a history and a path and a journey. We need to do that for ourselves. And so those would be two things that I think people could begin to do today, is make sure you're framed in a way to command the screen. And then the second is really dig into your own story. And interestingly about that, the work that I encourage my clients to do, and around their own story, and you look at the work an actor does to really develop a three-dimensional character, and then what a business does to define its brand. And you should imagine 3 Venn diagrams now with a lot of overlap, because the similarities between these 3 things it's uncanny. But that's what we bring into this space. It's what we bring into the space when we meet with people in person. It's also what we bring into the space when we meet with people on camera. Knowing ourselves and valuing ourselves is actually the first step to creating more connection and better connections across the lens.
So we're talking a lot about how to make these better connections. In my business, I talk a lot about executive presence. I also do a lot of writing about that. I have a recent LinkedIn article on that. So how does more presence help us achieve business goals? Like, make the correlation. What's the return on investment? What's that ROI? How do we correlate that so people can get a sense of why it's so important?
That's another great question. The correlation, the ROI, to put this in something tangible, is let's add one more word to the conversation. That is the question around power. And I say that not in the malicious sense by any means, but the recognition that relationships have a power dynamic. Presence is first and foremost about how you're showing up at the level of value that you deliver. That impression translates into, number one, it can translate into higher fees. It can translate into closing more deals. If you're getting people's attention and attracting them to your solution, you have the opportunity to get the next meeting. Presence translates, and the research supports this, as I mentioned before, translates into that if you're a startup CEO or founder, you're more likely to get investor funding. So you start putting this picture together of presence and credibility, and you begin to see that every aspect of business has a presence component.
You know, what you're saying makes me think of, in sort of layman's terms, it's the know, like, and trust factor. And just so you know, we have a lot of corporate women on our call today. And so for those of you listening in or watching today, ROI for you can translate into salary, bonuses, promotions, and those kinds of things. So it's across the board. Wouldn't you agree, Patrick?
Yes, absolutely. It's the internal translation. You put that into the internal translation, and then there's the external translation. So when you're looking for that next job, showing up with that presence, getting that promotion, and negotiating. Because oftentimes, really being grounded in our own presence and what we bring in our value means that we actually show up with we become the prize that organization is looking to hire.
Mm-hmm. So now let's go back to some practical, tactical things, a little bit more external. You know, a lot of companies out there are going to promise people, hey, we can make you look better on video. And, you know, I like to joke, well, this is what you got to work with. So, you know, good luck with that. But what makes what you do unique, and should people be doing more videos for social media, whether they have a small business or whether they work in corporate?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, it's the answer to the second question, should they be doing more videos, is a maybe answer. And the reason why I say that is the of communication that you need to implement in order to attract your target customer. Internally, I think video is underutilized well. Sad. Actually, I had a house of a client tell me that she had to sit through a mandatory with a vice president who had no camera presence, rambled on. It was an, I mean, literally an awful, almost cringe-worthy experience. She described it, and I'm like, that's an opportunity as a leader to show up as a leader, and video is a great way to do that. So creating videos, video is also very time intensive, or can be time intensive. But it can also be a time saver. So if you want to do a quick video for your team to explain something, and then you're going to do a 15-minute roundtable to answer any questions, could be a great way to also save time. The first part of the question, let me, would you remind me the first half of the question?
It was what makes what you do unique and different from
Yes.
what some of these companies are promising people.
Yeah. So I used to really focus on the idea that making, what I'm interested in is, yes, that's a piece of the puzzle, but what's really important is actually being better on camera. And where I come in and what Punchin does, there's two factors. The first factor is we're at the intersection of technology and humanity. We can't get away from this idea that better technology. I've kind of even taken a step back on better technology. When we show up as our best self, when we show up alive on camera, the technology can help amplify that frame components, but that's amplifier. That's not a replacement for actually being good on camera. That's kind of the first part. The other part that's unique is I bring in, we have a group of New York City actors, TV and film actors. My brother is our head of talent. And what we do is we bring these folks in. So when it comes to who to learn from on how to be on camera, why not work with people who have made this their livelihood? And ultimately and the reason why we bring this intersection together, this program together, is because ultimately we're all nonfiction actors now. And getting that as a core component to the work. So you look from a technology standpoint, we look at this from a story and branding standpoint, and we look at this from a, how do I show up human on camera? And that's where we bring in these professional TV and film actors, folks who are actually working. They just have some time to fill and would love nothing more than to be able to work with folks like you and I.
Well, that sounds fabulous and fun. So that definitely does sound like a unique advantage for what your organization is doing. Well, Patrick, I know this is hard to believe, but we are winding down on our time together. So I always like to close by asking our interview subject, what is one piece of advice, one simple piece of advice that you can offer to our viewers and listeners today that they can take away?
I think the piece of advice, particularly on this subject, is look at the camera. People want to see your eyes. They want to see that you're looking at them. And when you look across the lens, people feel more connected with you when they feel that you're looking at them.
Well, that note, that does conclude our interview with Patrick McGowan. And just a reminder, you can learn more about him at www.punchn punchin.io. So that's punchin.io. So thank you for being here today with us, Patrick. And for those of you who are still on with us, don't forget to visit reginabarr.com, where you can learn more about some of my upcoming programs and podcasts and other events on the events page. So with that, I want to say thank you, everyone, for being here with us, and have a wonderful day.